Hello and welcome back. So this is a pre-recorded session that's going to tell you a little bit more about the work group activities that you'll be doing over the next few weeks. So I had left you off when we were building personalization-ready journey maps. We were talking about how there are a few stages to building your maps, such as focusing on important tasks, building basic maps, prioritizing journeys, enriching the key maps, and then linking journeys to the content model. So today I'm going to be focusing on the earlier stages, but I'm going to walk you through what all the stages are. So stage number one is establishing your top tasks. So there are many ways to find out what the main tasks of your users are. There's two articles here by Jeff Sauro and Jerry McGovern, which I think are good references for you to take a look at. I'm not going to give you any particular methodology, which is my preference, because I think it's very situational. The methodology you use to gather your tasks is really dependent on the size of your business, the kind of users you have, the amount of intelligence you have about them, and so on. But the one universal thing is we want to find out what the most important tasks are. So what are people trying to achieve and how do they go about it? When we're looking at a journey, we're kind of looking at it as a process or a task. And what we're doing is we're unpacking task completion into questions and sub-questions. So I talked a little bit about this on the first lecture. I'll give you another example of a question that might lead someone to go on a journey. The overall journey question might be, can I afford a mortgage? So I want to do the assessment in order to know whether I can get a mortgage on my house. Along the way to achieving that overall objective and answering that question, I might have several sub-questions. So who do I know who I can ask? What types of mortgages are there? Maybe I've never had a mortgage at all and I don't know what, are there types of mortgage? Are there good mortgages and bad mortgages? Does length matter? Is a short-term or long-term option better? So we go on like this, breaking down the early questions to the late questions that eventually lead us to answer the overall question. The reason we use the question format is I found in working with work groups and teams, it's easier for us to really sympathize with the user when we do it in question form. When we do it in task form, like Google for some mortgages, or ask your friends, or assess your mortgage types, it's harder to connect emotionally with the journey that your user is on. So the question form allows us to open our minds to what they may be thinking and feeling. From those questions, we build out our maps. So we group related questions and tasks into journey stages, which don't necessarily have to have names at this point. You can name them later, but we are listing the things that people might ask and the order that they would ask them in. And we can also list potential interactions. So if someone has to ask, a friend, or go on a website, or is asking about a device, we can list those potential interactions there that are basic to our journey. When we're building up our basic map, we can already look for ways to add value. So we can think about how this process would play out today with our organization, and how could it play out better. And as I said in the first lecture, almost every time we do a journey map, people start thinking of how they could improve processes. So not only content, but even the basic processes that the company supports and offers it as part of its services or products, people start thinking, wow, we could do that better, or that doesn't make sense. So you look for ways to add value to the user's experience, and how that value can also add value back into your business. And we consider analytic insights you've got on how you're doing on those stages. So if we know already that half of people drop off after initial registration and they never speak to us again, that's something we can keep in mind. Or if the call center tells us we always get lots of complaints in the first week after someone starts using our service, or in the first week somebody buys our products. Those kind of metric numerical values that tell you something about a particular stage, those are very useful, and they will give you a way to understand how your journeys could be improved. We don't, however, need to go into all the detail at the first pass. So we can go over our journeys, starting just with the questions and how people are feeling, as I told you in the last session. And from these, we can build generic high-level maps that just look at the process for everybody. So again, we're listing the potential interaction points, and we can also start to list in another look through the backstage processes that support the journey. So although the journey is all about the user, you can do your first pass from the user's perspective, and then you can think, well, what do we as an organization do? For example, if you're talking about someone taking on a new service, when they hit purchase, what is happening backstage in your systems? And you can make some notes about that on your journey as well, if you have any backstage processes. That's very useful for seeing the back and forth between the user and yourself. Once you've got a basic journey, and I'll just take you back to refresh you, we had some examples. Basic journeys. We had the basic journey of attending an event where they became aware, they evaluated whether they want to go to the event, they actually registered, they visited the event, and then there was event follow-up. So that's a very basic high-level journey. So we don't have any backstage, we don't have any detail there. The other one we looked at was the set-top box journey, where someone is buying a digital set-top box for their TV, they purchase it, they learn about how to make a booking, they book, field engineer comes and installs it, and then they pay. These are basic high-level journeys. We have an understanding, that there's the different touch points of where this is happening within the business, what silo are you talking to, but there's very little detail. It's very generic for all types of users. But still, we've got a useful artifact, which I can tell you, when you get teams of people together to look at this, suddenly so they start having good ideas. But once we've done that, we can do that. Once we've done that for a few journeys, we want to start focusing on which of the journeys we're going to do in more depth. So which of the journeys where we're really going to do many passes over them and run through them several times. So we're going to find what I call the high-value journeys. So these are journeys which hit the sweet spot of being important to the brand and important to the customer. Not every problem is a problem that users really care about. For example, your relationship with your mobile phone provider. We lose the occasional call every now and then, or occasionally get some noise on the line. That's not a good thing, but as long as it's not up to a certain level, we kind of accept it. Whereas if we are frequently getting unexpected charges on our bill, we have a very big emotional reaction to that. So we have to look for the problems, but we want to prioritize the problems that have an emotional or practical impact on the user's reality, rather than treat every problem as equal priority. So that's impossible. So we have to choose the journeys that are most important and the points on those journeys that are most important. So once you've chosen your journeys, you focus on those and you enrich and improve your focus on those journeys and your understanding of what could be happening. This maps directly to content strategy, basically. So, when we talk about content strategy, we talk about right content, right format, right language, right time. And the content strategy is really doing all those things in a way that is the overlap between what the business wants to do and what the user wants to do. It's the alignment of content, people, process, platforms, and positioning to support business strategy. It addresses the overlap of organizational and user goals. This is another definition which complements the definition Rahel will have told you about it being a repeatable system for all aspects of content. These go together. This one is the one that connects it very much to the strategic goals. It's your strategy, but the reason it's strategic is because it's going to address your strategic objectives. It's an opportunity as well to capture customer data. If you have defined a journey with a defined outcome, you have a much more effective data for relevance or data for value proposition for your customers. So especially in Europe, we have to be very sensitive about how and when we capture customer data. So if you tell people, please give us your data, with a generic statement like, so that we can improve your experience, then they're just basically going to think you're using this so you can sell them more stuff. But if you have a journey, and you have a journey for which you have defined an outcome, and you define some user value, and you can articulate that back to users, you can say, if you give us your data, we can do these things for you when you are trying to accomplish these objectives. That's why we need your data, and that's how it will help you. So you might be able to use that data for other things as well, but at least you're giving them a good reason for asking for their data, and you'll get a much more engaged audience and much more likelihood that they'll actually give you their data if you give them a real reason to, and that you've understood that it's going to add value back to them. So after you've chosen your most important journeys, you start to enrich the key journeys with scenarios and narratives. So you start to bring in personas, tasks, contexts. So I showed you the generic journeys earlier. There was no persona, there was no context, there was no detail. So here we have a scenario like Alice the shopper wants to build her financial plan because New Year's is coming up and she might try to get a mortgage in next year. So the narrative is the story that we tell. You remember in my last class I said that the persona is like a photograph of somebody, and the journey map is like a storyboard for a movie about them. So this is kind of this description and script of that movie. So she's using some of her winter holiday at home, first on her phone but then on her desktop, to do some research to plan visits to banks in the New Year's. She asks her family for their experiences getting mortgages, and so on and so on. Each of the stages of the journey not only has a stage name, but it actually has a little bit of a story that describes really what's happening there in great detail. So you're only going to, of course, want to do this for high value journeys, and the more thought and time you put into it will be for your high value personas at the most emotionally engaged and practically important points on the journey. So when you look at this process, you think, I could never do that for everything on my website. I could never do that for omni-channel, for all my different types of channels. No, of course you could not. So that's why we have the discipline of focusing on when it's going to make the most difference. But when it does make that difference, you really want to get lots of detail and figure out what's really happening in the real world and imagine the possibilities on different channels, in different contexts, and for different kinds of people. So you want to consider roles, systems, data, content, whatever you have to draw on that makes that stage work as well as possible. So if you know things about people, if you know what roles they're playing, if you know what systems that you have that are going to affect that journey, and what content you have that's being used right now, then you can talk about all that in your journey map. The final stage is linking from your journey to your content assets. So you want to look for assets that you have versus ones that you need to create. You want to go on a full virtual reality tour of the user's life experience. And the reason that this is important for adaptive content is here's where you start to think of adaptive content. Adaptive logic. Considering the content, how could you personalize for that person and that context at that stage? So for example, if I'm evaluating attending an event, how is that different if I'm doing it on my phone versus on the website? How is that different if I'm doing that at another event? For example, if I'm at a one trade show for my industry and I hand you a flyer, like a printed invitation to another event which I'm hosting later in that year, how is that different than if you were to Google it and then find out about it through keywords? So we can create content that will work for both situations, but we may have to adapt it. You won't use the same call to action because one will have a phone number, one will have a button to click, one will maybe invite you to access a custom URL, whereas one of them will have a direct link. There's all sorts of little details that might be different. And if we're talking about different audiences, if you can ask somebody, are you in the pharmaceuticals industry or are you in travel and tourism? And you might give them very different information. So you want to consider that kind of adaptation possibility by mapping out your journeys versus people, situations, channels, and so on. So once you have that level of detail, then you can really come back to your content model and say, okay, well, if we have to adapt in those ways, then we're going to have to add metadata here, we're going to have to add structures there, and so on and so on. For efficiency, you want to be thinking, is there a core versus variant? Like, do you have a base of information which is for most of people most of the time, and you can just manage some little changes? That is, that's the most efficient if you can do that. If you can't do that, you might have to do something more sophisticated. If you have very, very different customers, very, very different ways of interacting, then you might not be able to. But I know that all my customers want to get as close as possible to having a single source that is usable in as many contexts and as many channels as they can. So I'm going to be telling you more examples in the new year, but it's really, really some exciting stuff is going on in the industry right now with single sourcing from all sorts of different ways of interacting with content. So on this URL here, we've got the spreadsheet which I gave you earlier. I've added an example to it so you can download it again from bit.ly/UC-Graz 2016. Just checking that link looks good. Yep. So on that link, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm just double checking that link's working. Oh, sorry, problem with my link. Okay, that link is fixed now. UC-Graz 2016, that's a bit.ly link there. On that, you'll now find a new example, which I've made for you, where we go through the story of working mom Anna. So working mom Anna is a working mother who's a strong leader at home and at work. She likes to run a tight ship and is most relaxed when she feels she's got a level of control. And her scenario is she's abroad with her kids in Greece and she has had her wallet and her card stolen. So this is the journey of replacing a card while abroad with family. She is a customer and the overall question is, my stuff has all been stolen and I have my kids with me, what do I do? So you can read through the guidance here, which I've left open. When you don't need this anymore, you can hide that so it goes away. But we go through the stages of investigating. And I've got 2 steps within that investigating process where she's going to go on an old desktop PC to get help. She goes to Google Greece and types in bank stolen card, the name of the bank, of course, stolen card. And she's asking herself, has anyone accessed my account? How do I get cash? How do I keep people out of my accounts and phone? And so I tell the rest of her story, which you can read along here. And down here, I'm using the depth of content and content assets tabs. So these are the specific things, the actual content assets that she will need, like the international phone numbers with hour availability. She lists of channels which she can report her card stolen, And then in the depth of content, we just describe what kind of thing she's looking for. At the beginning, she wants detailed but short, so she wants exact information, but she only wants the key information she needs to move to the next step. And then we move on to detailed first level of task support, and so on and so on. So have a read through Anna's story, and you'll be able to have an understanding of how this template looks when it's filled out. You can also have a look down at the opportunities to add value and see that Anna starts on a desktop computer, and she does this whole journey on a desktop computer. So the device is always large, non-touch. And she's talking to the hotel staff and family and friends at different points in her journey. So have a look at that. And I'd like you to start telling the story of your users. So you should have been looking at questions and thinking about feelings. So give me the rest of the detail now. Tell the real story with the full detail of what's happening, and think about what kind of content these two different kinds of people might want. So with that extra detail, then we'll be able to think of what our content requirements are, and then in January we'll talk more about how those requirements get mapped back to our actual content model so that we can make our content for our users. So I'm just going to say a few last words. The journey map is about selecting from the infinite. So a persona is a generalized picture of possibly millions of real people. A journey is a generalized view of a theoretically limitless number of potential customer experiences. It's a tool that allows the brand to select the stages that have business potential. And, of course, business potential has to keep in mind happy customers. So persona is to person as a customer journey map is to a real life experience. We cannot manage and we cannot anticipate every experience everybody could possibly have, but there is a way to give ourselves covered much better than we are today and get our content much more sophisticated than it is today. And that's by doing good, solid, detailed customer journey maps and using those to design great content for our users. So I hope everybody has a great holiday. Enjoy filling out your maps. Email if you have any questions. I'll be back on January 9th. But it'll be pretty full week, so it'll be I will try to get to any emails as fast as I can. But they won't be any responses before January 9th. That's for sure. Otherwise, till next time, Nazarbina out.